If you have any interest in living a longer and healthier life, you're in the right place. Today, I will be speaking to vein specialist and longevity expert Attilio Cavezzi. Attilio shares his unique perspective on healthy living. I ask him what he does to stay healthy and what supplements he takes. And be sure to stay to the end when he surprises me with his advice on a glass of red wine occasionally. It's not what you think. So let's get started. Now tell me, Attilio, you're probably, certainly to people like me, best known for your interest in phlebology and lymphophlebology. How did you get interested in longevity? What was your personal journey into your interest in longevity, Attilio?
Well, thanks for the invitation, first of all, Haroun. Well, what can I tell you is that everything started somehow from my personal health condition, let's say. And I started to realize on one side that medical science was not so good, let's say. But apart from this, I would say that starting from myself, my health, then I started to look for complementary, not alternative, complementary integrated medicine, let's say, for problems like immune issues or like atherosclerosis and so on. On one side, this was a personal issue. On the other side, I discovered also the potential of a few, let's say, food supplements, for example, on my personal health, okay, but also on the vascular problems for the arteries, especially because as a vascular surgeon, I have to deal with the arterial problems, not from the surgical point of view. And I would say also that I reached a kind of top situation for me in phlebolymphagy. I started to be a little bit, tired of listening and telling the same things all the time, repeating the same story. And I wanted to study new things, let's say. And I had a few people, I would be sincere, who clearly influenced me about this journey, let's say. And talking to them more and more, I realized that longevity medicine is the future. I mean, when we speak about diabetes, when we speak about obesity, autoimmune disease, neurodegenerative disease, and cardiovascular disease, oncology, they are all, let's say, children of aging in the vast majority of the cases. So if you age well, you don't get ill, you don't get sick. So I started to understand this on myself, and I wanted to become, let's say, healthier and younger. But first of all, I understood that I had to take care myself of my patient, not just delegating the patients to other doctors who take care of thyroid, who take care of heart. So I'm not a cardiologist. I need a cardiologist, of course. But to make it short, I started to take care of the, let's say, the whole patient. And I started to tell my patient, if you want me to take care of your legs, for example, when they come for spider veins or whatever, if you want me to take care of your legs, I need to take care of the owner of the legs. And I started to realize, so what do you mean? I mean that you are obese. I mean that you are taking these drugs which are not so good for you. I mean that you are, for example, under a strong, let's say, autoimmune attack because of thyroid, because of rheumatoid arthritis, and so on and so on. So I need to take care of everything. Because, for example, chronic venous insufficiency is strictly linked to all this stuff. Even more disabled patients. I mean, many of my patients have postural issues, have not such a good walking, and we know the relevance of the pumps, for example. Also, the diaphragmatic pump is so important, and people cannot breathe properly. So I started to integrate my medical approach with many, many things. And then I started to get results. For example, I started to heal diabetic patients, which was interesting, let's say. And I discovered more and more toys to play with. And this is the very important issue. I need to play. If I don't play, if I get bored, if I get tired, I don't like to go ahead like I was going. So I, let's say, got a wider spectrum of interests in my life. I keep going with phlebolymphagy, but with some innovation anyway about foam, innovations about, let's say, lipedema, lymphedema. I'm trying new things and so on, but not just based on technology, based on the holistic approach to the patient, let's say.
That's very interesting that you should say that, Attilio, because many years ago I had health issues that I was concerned about, and my health was quite poor, I would say, as I turned 50. And for me, it was shocking to realize that some of the advice that I had been giving to my patients was entirely wrong. For example, avoiding saturated fats and cholesterol, being obsessed with cholesterol and statins, and the avoidance of all sorts of things that we now know are not harmful: eggs, butter, cream. And I noticed in your presentation that you make this point. So in many ways, some of the things that you mentioned already, I was aware of, but I have to tell you, the presentation, which I'm going to show shortly, was very surprising to me, because having concentrated on things like exercise and diet, I was extremely surprised to hear about all the other things that can adversely affect health. So at this stage, I'm going to show the presentation that you did for me. I'm going to put it into our discussion now, and then we'll return and we'll ask a few questions and have some discussion.
Hello, here is Dr. Cavezzi, Attilio, from Italy. I'm a vascular surgeon interested in phlebolymphodology, but more recently also about longevity medicine. I thank Haroun for this opportunity to share my experience with longevity medicine and to talk about how to live longer and healthy. So there are no commercial interests concerning my presentation. So let's start in a humble way, telling that science is a constantly changing base of knowledge. And Socrates told us, the only thing I know is that I know nothing. That's why scientific progress should be considered a kind of trip from mistake to truth. Why this kind of starting? Because through a few publications together with other friends, and especially reviewing literature, we have more and more understood that we are learning from our mistakes. For example, the saturated fats were demonized in the past and they are sanctified today. So it means that somehow we have to go ahead, taking also into account the problems of medicine. For example, industry-sponsored studies more likely show positive outcomes in comparison to independent studies. And this wonderful article from Ioannidis clearly demonstrated that most published research findings are false. And this British Medical Journal article also highlighted how the majority of the measures we use in medicine are not so evidence-based. For example, in this review of the Cochrane reviews, in Ioannidis and colleagues demonstrated that more than 9 out of 10 healthcare interventions lack high-quality evidence supporting their efficacy and safety. So all this confirms us that medicine has to improve. And last but not least, we know that cardiovascular diseases are the first cause of death worldwide. The second cause of death is oncology, that means neoplasms. But the third leading cause of death is just the medical doctor, the medical error, medicine. Having said this, this is applicable also to longevity medicine, because somehow we have prolonged the average age, but we have not prolonged the maximum age. More importantly, we have prolonged the average lifespan, but we have not prolonged the average health. And the price we pay is the incredibly higher rate of a lot of chronic degenerative diseases in the elderly, such as diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's and Parkinson, cancer, atherosclerosis, autoimmune disease, and disability. Over 70 years, human beings are featuring so many diseases. So not at all we have prolonged the average health span. What is aging then? Aging is the progressive deterioration of the homeostasis and adaptation capabilities humans have within the environment in relation to the passing years. So we start to talk about adaptation as a fundamental issue in aging. So the good and bad thing concerning aging and chronic degenerative diseases is that these issue is in our hands because only 25% of aging and chronic degenerative diseases depends upon on our chromosomes, genome, and so on. So on our parents. 75% depends upon epigenetics, nutrition, lifestyle, stress management, environment. So epigenetics is the fundamental science which may help us to improve longevity in humans, and it is of fundamental importance in longevity medicine. We could say that we are born as copies, but we die as originals. This is just epigenetics. As you can see, our health and our disease depend upon mostly nutrition, lifestyle, stress management, and environment. Most of all, I would say stress management, as we will see in a while, okay? Then, what is longevity medicine then? It is also called anti-aging medicine. It is a kind of preventive medical science which aims to maintain the subject at the healthiest level possible in well-being condition for the longest time possible. So our aim would be to live healthier and longer, and interacting with the psychophysical unit through nutrition, exercise, sleep, nutraceuticals, drugs, biotechnologies, and mind and dressing measure, and so on, we may improve longevity in humans. Why we age and get sick? First of all, genetics, but that's just 25%. Then we have inflammation. It is called inflammaging. We have mitochondrial dysfunction. We have psychoneurobiology dysfunction, a kind of hyperactivation of stress axis. We have also oxidative stress. We have alteration of DNA, RNA. We have glycation, the relevant role of carbohydrates to create hyperinsulinemia, and so on and so on. This is what was called, and more properly, the chronic low-grade cellular inflammation, which is at the root of any tissue degeneration and of cell senescence. This is a kind of secret killer of humans and secret factor which brings to a wrong aging, let's say, a sick aging. Also, microbiota deterioration is important, and many other things which you can read here. Then, if we move to the diagnostic part, we know that we have the classical clinical consultation, many parameters, but blood testing is the core examination that we need when we want to perform a correct longevity medicine. Beyond this, we have heart rate variability testing, the bioimpedance, many other things, and last but not least, vascular color duplex ultrasound, for example, carotid and femoral arteries. So what is important in anamnesis in the diagnostic pathway? Smoking, because smokers live 10 years less. And this is important to talk to our patient, explaining exactly the danger of smoking. BMI, body mass index, which is strictly correlated to mortality, as you can see from this graph, for example. The higher the BMI, the lower the BMI, which means below 20, the higher the risk of premature mortality, especially above 35 and below 20, below 16, 17. So now let's move to the core concept I told you before, adaptability, which is also called resilience. In this editorial in The Lancet, health was considered as the ability to adapt to one's environment. So this is resilience as key factor of aging, is the ability of a system to adapt to change. Hundreds of articles in Medline, probably thousands of articles in Medline correlate resilience with longevity. Basically, the better your psychophysical resilience, the better your longevity, health, and lifespan will be. And this is true also in terms of cell adaptability to psychological and biological stress. All this stuff is of central importance in cell senescence, which is the core process at the root of aging. So what could we do to improve health and longevity. First of all, let's go through the psychoneurobiology aspect, which is also called psychoneuroendocrine immunology. So awareness, stress management, and other issues addressed to improving the psychophysical resilience. This is the core business of any doctor who deals with longevity medicine. But mitochondria target therapy is also very important because these organelles proved the most important organelle in the cell to regulate a lot of metabolic pathways inside the cells and to regulate aging in general. Then we have nutrition, nutraceuticals, and many other things which we will review in a while. Nutrition is so important for aging, so important for health. But which nutrition? In fact, Egyptian people knew that a quarter of what you eat keeps you alive. Your doctors lives with the other three quarters. This is known 3,800 years before Christ. We still don't know it probably. So which is the proper nutrition strategy? I would say low in calorie, but especially in carbohydrates, seed oils and other issues. Adequate intake of good fats and noble proteins. Intake of polyphenols is profitable. Intake of omega-3 is good. And intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting proved of extreme importance to have a proper aging. You can read here a lot of interesting outcomes you can get through a proper intermittent fasting. And generally speaking, you can read that there is an improvement of longevity, improvement of insulin sensitivity, increase of ketone bodies, and so on and so on. So overall, intermittent fasting is one of the most proven and interesting modalities to improve longevity. We can use food supplements because food supplements may provide functional effects on human health. Food supplements, for example, based on polyphenols such as curcumin and other maqui, hydroxytyrosol, and so on, but also food supplements based on PQQ and other useful molecules which regulate cell metabolism. Last but not least, we have a lot of important endogenous molecules such as melatonin firstly, but also vitamin C, vitamin D, and glutathione, coenzyme Q10. All this stuff can be used as food supplements to improve our health and the aging process. But also all these molecules, or the majority of them, can be injected intravenously. And this is a more advanced form of treatment for those people who want to stay young, healthy, and improve their longevity. Targeting mitochondria would be important with these compounds. You can read a lot of things in these slides, but there is a lot of literature which is proving how important is intravenous therapy in longevity medicine. Physical activity. It is proven that physical activity, for example, 20-30 minutes walk 3-4 days per week, provides a lot of benefits. Overall, we would say that good physical activity, not too much, not too little, decreases mortality by 14% and increases lifespan by 3 years. Sunlight exposure and mortality are linked. As you can see from these graphics, for example, avoiding sun exposure brings a much higher mortality rate. On the contrary, most active sun exposure will reduce heart attacks, bone fractures, and death from any disease. So sun exposure is also very, very important. Sleep. To make it simple, lowest risks of mortality has been demonstrated for 7-8 hours of sleep. On the contrary, there is an increasing risk of mortality associated with shorter or longer sleep duration. And you can see here the relative risk demonstration through different studies, how they change the relative risks if you sleep too little or too long. Then why do we speak about sleep? Because of melatonin production. Melatonin production is typically during night time. That's why we need to sleep, to produce melatonin. The problem is that melatonin, which is probably the most important anti-aging molecule, is produced less and less along our life. And that's why also sleep duration decreases. That's why we need to take melatonin at a certain point of our life. Sauna is another lifestyle habit which dramatically decreases cardiovascular mortality. As you can see, the more you go under sauna regime, the better you improve your cardiovascular health. And these data, which are so nice, are independently associated with cardiovascular mortality. It means sauna has per se a relevant influence on the mortality and on the lifespan, let's say. And these are other trials which have been published. Now we move to the psychoneurobiology or the psychoneuroendocrine immunology. PNEI, PNEI. This is a kind of discipline which studies the bidirectional relationships between mind, the psychological aspect, and neurobiological system. It's a kind of paradigm with which we should approach human health and disease, because it's time to overcome the reductionism of the opposition between mind and body, between medicine and psychology, because this is a network we have inside our body, and it regulates through the neurovegetative system, through our thoughts, to our mind activity. All this stuff dramatically influences our biology. Emotions influence biology. This is an article we published concerning this relationship between PNEI and longevity. Which are the main concepts behind the psychoneurobiology? The connection between mind and biology systems, which are condition each other. It has to do with stress coping. The greater or lesser ability to adapt to psychophysical, chemical, and biological stress, which is resilience, determines our better or worse aging, determines the incidence and let's say the course of our metabolic diseases. And another important issue is that the foundation of the mind-body relationship and of resilience are required in the first 1,000 days of life, as we will see in a while. So we have to do with stress coping. This is the typical Cellier stress curve. You see that some acute stress is beneficial for our health, and it is called stress, eustress. On the contrary, when the stress and our response prolongs, we enter into distress, which is the chronic stress exposure, the chronic stress response. And that leads to exhaustion, to distress, and to negative findings from the biological and psychological point of view. Why? Because stress response is negative when it is prolonged, as cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and many other biological molecules produce a kind of hyperinflammatory state. That's why the stress response should be short and beneficial, and not long, prolonged, and especially not evoked for any minimal issue. All this stuff, which means awareness, resilience, greater or lesser activation of stress axis, and so health and disease, is rooted in our first 1,000 days of life. We call early life adversities these events which dramatically condition our health and disease during the first part of our life. So we could say that the first 1,000 days of life profoundly influence all the modulation of the epigenetic factors on human health and disease. So resilience, why is it so important? You see from this study, for example, how survival curve and mortality curve significantly depend upon the degree of the resilience of the subject. There are studies along 15 years where they clearly demonstrate that the greater the resilience, the greater the survival. So again, resilience is becoming the key factor for longevity. You can see also, for example, how here in this study, higher psychological resilience was independently associated with lower all-cause mortality risk. And there is a kind of hazard ratio which is dramatically showing how you can significantly decrease your mortality risk for cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, cancer, and other causes if you have good resilience. This is a very, very important article. It is a meta-analysis of 165 articles where incidence and mortality of cancer is significantly higher in people who have a lower resilience, and basically they increase by 125% the possibility, the hazard ratio for cancer. And also chronic stress has a dramatically impact on the onset and the course of cancer. So you can imagine that it means that cancer is not let's say, a casual event. It's rooted in our resilience, very likely. On the opposite, optimism extends lifespan by 11. Optimism reduces the myocardial ischemia or stroke risk. Optimism decrease all-cause mortality risk. So our thoughts, our character, our resilience significantly impact our health, our longevity. And also the adverse childhood experiences in those first 1,000 days of life significantly impact the risk of death. You can see here that 2 or more early life adversity condition men's and women's risk of premature death. And there are so many articles about this issue. This is another article. I don't want to be too long. And for example, in this study, in this systematic review, they analyzed 20 million participants. In 20 million participants, they discovered that childhood adversity was responsible for approximately 439,000 deaths per year in USA, and 15% of total annual mortality in USA depends upon childhood adversities. So this is something to keep in mind. We should choose proper parents for ourselves to live longer. I know I'm joking, it is not possible, but it is something to keep in mind for the future generation. Spirituality. Spirituality is important. It's another way to cope with stress. It is another way to improve our resilience. You can see here 74,000 healthy nurses followed for 20 years. And the nurses who had a better longevity was the ones who attended more than once religious service per week. Again, spirituality helps for, let's say, health and for longevity. How can you improve resilience, awareness, and psychoneurobiology? Of course, there are several options we have: meditation, mindfulness, psychotherapy, and many, many other things. Also, for example, photobiomodulation, vagus nerve stimulation. I don't want to go into details, melatonin and so on, but it is important to keep in mind that anyway, taking care of our thoughts and of our mind will bring a better health. So, to go to the end, we were told by Feuerbach that we are what we eat. I would say that we are what we think. That's why, again, longevity medicine is moving towards this idea of taking care of our emotion. This is an Italian singer who clearly showed in a song a wonderful thought. If you want to know your thoughts of yesterday, observe your body today, because your body is the result of your thoughts. If you want to know what you will be like tomorrow, observe your thoughts of today. And David Bowie, aging is an extraordinary process where you become the person you always should have been. That's why I love longevity medicine, to take care of my future and the future of my patient. Heraclitus, day by day, what you choose, what you think, and what you do is who you become. And this is profoundly true. So the secret to living well and longer is eat half, walk double, laugh triple, and love without measure. So I sincerely thank you all, and let's remember that we are born old, but we can become young, and we can give more years to our lives and more life to our years. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic. Now, tell me, Attilio, Of the things that you have put in that presentation, which of them for you personally do you think has had the biggest impact?
Well, as I was trying to explain quickly, because the presentation is a bit short, to summarize, let's say, 15 years of studies, of research, and let's say of literature, because literature is a huge load of information. So, as I tried to say, probably psychophysical resilience is the most important factor for our health, which means the capability, the ability to adapt to any form of stress. And by stress, I mean even simple things. I mean, you are driving your car and someone makes something wrong and you get angry, just to tell something very silly,
Yes.
And that's wrong. I mean, you shouldn't get angry. Just take your time, go ahead, because the hyperactivation of the stress axis is the main issue which leads to the inflammaging or the chronic low-grade cellular inflammation, which is the basic process at the root of aging, and maladaptation to stress is really important. And to make it short, I would say that all this is also based on mitochondria health, because linking mind and body is very important if we want to go for our own health in a proper way and for our patients' health. And mitochondria are probably the linkage. There is a guy in New York, Martin Picard, who created, let's say, the psychobiology of mitochondria, or mitochondria psychobiology. It means that our thoughts influence our body and vice versa. And as these organelles, mitochondria, are becoming more and more important for our cell metabolism, I mean, we are discovering more and more how they are important. Then he discovered that stress axis basically significantly impact the functionality of mitochondria. That's why I dedicate a lot of time to the research and to the clinical practice on how to improve mitochondria biogenesis and function, because they are really at the root. So these are the two issues that I try to handle. On one side, the psychoneurobiology, so the mind-body interaction. On the other side, how to improve mitochondria, which are really, really important for our health. Then we can talk about how to use nutrition, how to use lifestyle in a proper way, to sleep, as you saw from my presentation, and so on. But also, more recently, I'm focusing on the possibilities of biophysics and biotechnologies, and something like high-level chemistry, biochemistry, because the more I go ahead, the more I discover new things, and very, very, let's say, recent things, innovative things, which can help in the research of our better health. And the majority of this stuff perfectly applies to phlebolymphodology and arterial issues. That's why, for example, for chronic venous insufficiency, for lymphedema, we can talk about, and also arterial issues, we can talk about translational medicine. We need to combine different disciplines to reach the best goal, the best outcome when we treat our patient with, let's say, post-thrombotic syndrome, lymphedema, lipedema, because it's also a matter of insulin, it's a matter of weight, as we know, it's a matter of pump, it's a matter of different things. And the opposite, when we talk about Alzheimer, or we talk about Parkinson or multiple sclerosis, it's also a matter of venous and lymphatic drainage from the lymphatic system and from the venous sinuses in the brain, and so on and so on. I'm discovering more and more how to use my knowledge of vascular diseases in medicine and my knowledge in medicine in vascular disease, a kind of combination.
So, in terms of the mind body connection, what practical things would you advise the general public to do? You mentioned the example of somebody perhaps cutting you up in traffic and getting angry. What strategies can we apply on a daily basis to try and reduce that chronic stress response that is so damaging to our health?
Fortunately, our stress coping attitude is rooted in our first 1,000 years of life. So during pregnancy, we are in the uterus, let's say, and there something very important happens. And let's say after, in the following 2 or 3 years, that's the priming we receive on the way we respond to any stressor. So let's say resilience. Our resilience is rooted in our first 1000 days, let's say. So we cannot change our parents and reborn to be okay. We cannot do that. But having said this, we can change. We can change. But first of all, we need awareness. I mean, become aware of who you are, and then you say, okay, I don't like how I'm getting older. I don't like to be so stressed and so on and so on. Once you get awareness, then you decide, and you decide, it's your will, because the doctor gives you the motivation. But will beats motivation 10-0, we say in Italian. So will is much more important than motivation that doctor gives you. So doctor is just a kind of help, not the healer. The healer is the patient. So meditation, for example, or mindfulness, yoga, a kind of spirituality that you can get. And then let's say many other strange things such as melatonin use, because we need to improve the vagus nerve. In our autonomic nervous system balance, we know that vagus nerve is anti-inflammatory and is, let's say, something which reduces all the activity. It's a kind of break for the orthosympathetic or sympathetic system, which is the problem. We need sympathetic system for acute stress. Then we have to release, slow down. If you don't slow down, then you are always activated on hyper activation of stress axis and so on. So noradrenaline, adrenaline, cortisol, and so on. So all this stuff, melatonin can help for vagus. You can have a kind of biofeedback of vagus nerve. You can use a photobiomodulation, especially red and near infrared light are so powerful in improving the balance of the autonomic nervous system, for example. You can use some compounds such as also ashwagandha or others. And then again, what I underline is breathing. Learning to breathe better helps you. We all know that when you inhale, you get an increase of your cardiac rate. Exhale, you get a decrease. Bradycardia, tachycardia. Bradycardia, that's physiology, okay? So that means that our respiration is a perfect way to activate through exhaling, so through the part of the respiration, we can increase the vagus tone, for example. But overall, what I'm saying is that, first of all, you need to take consciousness of who you are and you need to change. So it's your mind which drives you, and it's your will which drives you to a new way to intend how to cope with any stressor. So if you see a cat, that's just a cat. You shouldn't see in that cat a lion, because if you see a lion, then you dramatically react, because you need to dramatically react to a lion. You have to escape. You cannot fight, so you have to escape or faint. We have three possibilities: escape, fight, or faint in front of a lion, in front of an overwhelming stress. So, but that's not a lion, that's a cat. And if it is a cat, let it go and you will live longer. So when you look at the blue zones, the famous blue zones, Okinawa, Sardinia, Loma Linda, and so on, they are called blue zones where they live longer and healthier. If you look at these people, and if I look at my people around my town, the ones who are older than is or even 100 years older or older, they are all the same. They may smoke, rarely. They may drink a little bit too much alcohol, rarely. But whatever they eat, whatever they smoke, whatever they do, they are all the same, resilient. Let it go. Then it goes. Then it goes. In Japan, they say, then it goes. Let it go. Then it will go. Take it easy, something like that. Okay? They are all the same, resilient to any form of stress.
So we can't change the first 100 days of our life, but maybe are there public health measures? First 1,000. Oh, sorry, the first 1,000. Yeah. Maybe there are some public health measures, or maybe there are societal changes and education that might help, do you think? Have you considered those? Or are there any advice you might be able to give on that?
Yeah, that's, I would say, the core issue of the future health management. I mean, Bowlby was a great British psychologist, and Bowlby's theory of attachment really is dramatically showing how the attachment between the child and the parents, mother especially, is of paramount importance for child and especially adults' health. There are really thousands of studies which show that the way you attach to your parents, the way you live the first 1,000 days dramatically conditions your future health. Having said this, we should take all this issue in our hands and talk to politics, to obstetricians, to doctors, to relatives, to grandmothers and grandfathers, to the kindergarten managers, and so on and so on. To all these caregivers, they should know that what they do will dramatically condition adults' health and, let's say, social economic issues, because today we spend so much money for health because of dramatic beginning of life of these people who are today sick. Okay, that's not so easy, I realize it. But if you cannot change parents, grandparents, kindergarten, doctors who take care, let's say obstetricians, gynecologists, and so on, pediatricians are very important. This would be a real first step to change everything in 50 years. We would see incredible improvements. Apart from this, anyway, if you make people aware, then people can change. That's an issue. So when you are 50, I mean, I want to tell you a little secret, let's say. One of the main issues that pushed me to change my medical approach was a little, not so little, carotid plaque I had. It disappeared after 10 years. I know it's impossible. Now it's, let's say, 10, 15%. Okay. I worked a lot on that. I work a lot, changing my character, first of all. So it's possible to, let's say, to make the plaque go back if you change a lot of things, because it's a kind of jigsaw. I think in English is a jigsaw. Health is a jigsaw. You cannot say, I eat better, I'm okay. No. That's not the case. You cannot say, I exercise, I'm okay. No, not at all. You can say, I think better, I'm okay. That's quite true. Not the totality, but it's probably the most important thing. That's why in my presentation, I said that maybe we are not what we eat, but we are what we think. That's important because Bruce Lipton and many others demonstrated that our thoughts condition our genes, epigenetics. That's the real issue. You can imagine that there are a few studies, and there is also a very nice systematic review where they clearly demonstrated through literature that meditation kept the telomeres long. So you can imagine that meditation works on the telomeres, the ending part of the chromosomes. Keeping the telomeres long means better longevity because these are kind of caps at the end of the chromosomes, okay? If they keep there, if they're alive and kicking, let's say, your chromosomes work better. And this is this is a biological issue. But can you imagine that these caps are influenced by your meditation? So a perfect axis between mind and body. So these are demonstrations how our thoughts condition our body, our health. And that's psychoneurobiology or psychoneuroendocrine immunology.
Well, Attilio, I have to tell you that when I watched your presentation, and I've watched it twice very carefully now, for me, that was the most surprising element of your presentation. I was expecting talk about diet, exercise, supplements, but hearing you say it again, that your thoughts and your emotions are so important, possibly more important than anything else, that to me is so surprising. And I think a lot of people will also find that surprising, There are many people who are longevity experts who don't emphasize that enough. That's very surprising. Is that one of the main changes that you think you have made in your own lifestyle?
Yeah, I tried and I think I did my best and so on. But I'm always, let's say, interested in the magnitude of the effect. You know, for example, when you look at what eating does for you, I mean, good nutrition, let's say it helps you, let's say 20%. When you look at simple sauna, what does for you in cardiovascular, from the cardiovascular point of view, it's higher than that, much higher than that, much higher than any other drug. So, and that's what I am interested in. And when you look at resilience, the magnitude of effect, there was a paper I showed very quickly. We are talking about 20 years longer life, probably, and healthier life, if you think well. I cannot tell you for sure because there is not such a study, but when you look at your first 1,000 days, sorry, and the life, there are studies where they clearly show that aging is much better when you have a better awareness, resilience, thoughts, and this is all rooted in this science which is called psychoneurobiology. I am a doctor who is using a lot of intravenous therapy. I'm using supplements. I'm telling my patient how to eat, how to exercise, and so on and so on. But I'm doing this because they are not so prone and ready to change their thoughts. If they change their thoughts, they would need much less advices, much fewer advices, okay? But they don't change that. They come to me, doctor, have this leg, and this problem, this problem. And I tell them many things. And I see they cannot catch properly what I'm telling in the most cases. And then at the end of my long explanation, she's going away and tells me, okay, doctor, you told me so many things to change. Listen to me. I have a little problem here. Can you see my wrinkle here? And I say, listen, I told you so many things about your health. You're going away from me telling that you have a wrinkle and you want to take care of a wrinkle here. So you realize that patients sometimes are not ready to change their character or, let's say, their attitude towards stress. And that's why you need a lot of complementary integrative treatments, which are useful. And I'm doing a lot of this stuff to my patient. And biophysics and biochemistry are really improving and giving a lot of help. Photobiomodulation, especially in new substances like methylene blue, melatonin, as I told you, carnosine, procaine. They are something very interesting to improve longevity. But on top, I would put mind activity.
Yes. Being a vascular surgeon, Attilio, I'm sure you know, is hugely stressful. And working as a doctor in a hospital or even primary care or tertiary care, it's extremely stressful. We as doctors find it very difficult to switch off and relax and take this attitude of let it go. Was it hard for you? I mean, is it still a struggle, I suspect?
Yeah, well, I tell myself that one of the most stressful moments is when you operate because you can work, but you cannot do everything on yourself. You need some help. Sometimes they give you wrong instruments, or you tell something, give me this drug, then give you another drug, or whatever happens, and they pay and so on and so on. So I started step by step to be more and more focused. I'm doing this here and now, here and now. So you are there, you work, and then full stop. That's it. I forget about my patient just in, let's say, 1 minute or two. I never remember the family name or the name of my patient. Never. Because I detach from them immediately after the end of my work. I'm ready to work on them whenever needed, but focusing here and now, here and now, here and now. This is something that helped me to improve my relationship with my job. But again, as I told you, I found new toys because that's important because it's stressful. Also, longevity medicine can be stressful, but it's such a nice game that you play with your patient, removing drugs, explaining, sending videos where you explain why you should stop statins in the vast majority of the cases, why you should stop proton pump inhibitors in the vast majority of the cases because they are so harmful, and so on and so on and so on. And why you should use other interesting compounds, maybe food supplements or sometimes drugs and so on. And they come back and they become healthier. especially with diabetes, I tell you, it's a wonderful game because the vast majority of the doctor tells you, okay, diabetes is forever. We talk about type 2. I was able to improve dramatically also type 1, which is, of course, another story. But type 2 diabetes, when the patients do what I say, they all heal, all, but they must do or they should do what I suggest them. And that's something which creates me problems because the other doctors get a little bit angry because they say, what the hell is happening? Your thyroid is going better. Why are, now you don't need any more insulin? Well, because there is a strange doctor there who told me how to eat, how to sleep, how to sleep. Can you imagine that 6 days, just 6 days of, let's say, 4 5 hours sleep increases insulin in your blood by 46% and glycemia of 23%. Only 6 days when you sleep bad. So can you imagine
Yes.
years of sleeping 4 5 hours per night or 9 10 hours per night? It is extremely wrong and it creates diabetes. Diabetologists don't know anything about this, don't want to care about
No.
that. They care a
No.
little bit about diet, but they care about drugs. And we have no money for drugs now. We are really running out money for health system, which are collapsing somehow if you don't take new measures to give responsibility to the patient, because then we talk about patients, not only a question of doctor, it's also a matter of patient, especially about longevity. They must want it. If they don't want it, I give my suggestion, you give me your money, okay, but I don't need your money, I need your health. That's my typical talk to my patients.
It's very difficult, actually, because I remember many years ago talking to people with type 2 diabetes and explaining to them that it was a problem of a carbohydrate excess, not a problem of needing medication. And it's hard to get that message through, Attilio, isn't it? I mean, are you finding that difficult?
Yeah, it's difficult, but I can tell you that motivation, because I just give motivation, if it is followed by result, then they start to believe in me and let's say in the suggestions, how to eat, how to walk longer and better and so on and so on. They start to believe because when the mind of the patient starts to feel he's stronger, he feels better, and he needs from 40 insulin units, 30, 20, 0 metformin, and there will be a day no more net metformin, and the skin improves, and he walks longer, and so on and so on. Then they follow you for life. They are stuck to you and say, you saved my life, and now I'm following all your prescriptions. But it's a hard job. I
Yes,
know it.
it is a hard job. Motivation. People are prepared to take a tablet or an injection or a medication, but it's difficult to motivate people to do the work themselves. It is difficult. So your advice really is to change the way you think and how you deal with stress. That's the primary thing. And you've mentioned many times now the importance of sleep. Sleep is a difficult one, isn't it? A lot of people complain they don't get enough sleep. And you've mentioned many times that melatonin might be helpful in this situation. Now, in the UK, we can't get melatonin. I don't know if you can get it in Italy or in Europe, but we can't get melatonin here. Is there anything that people can do themselves to ensure they get better sleep?
Well, melatonin, as doctors, we can prescribe in Italy, but it is also at very, very low, ridiculous dose, 1 milligram, available out of the counter. I mean, you can buy very easily in any drug shop and so on. If you want higher doses, just recently there are a couple of melatonins at 3 4 milligrams, which is still too low a dose. So let's say that 10 milligram per day, or let's say per night, let's say better, would be the ideal dose in the majority of the patients after the age of 50, let's say. Of course, when we talk about more important diseases such as cancer or autoimmune disease or other things, then you can need even more. I use it also under the intravenous form because it is a kind of compound drug. As we taking care of patients by compound drugs in sclerotherapy, and we are still, for example, sodium salicylate, I use it a lot as a compound drug. Glycerin, I use it a lot as a compound drug in sclerotherapy. Even foam, was used as an off-label at the beginning, and so on and so on. So this is the situation for melatonin in Italy. You can buy it, but it is just 1 milligram in the majority of the cases. Then you can use as a compound drug. As a compound, you are a doctor, you prescribe, and the pharmacy makes it just for you and for that patient. And melatonin is very important. Really, it is one of the oldest molecules we have in our body, and it is an extremely pleiotropic drug, pleiotropic molecule, sorry. It means it does many things. It is of extreme importance in mitochondria. Once again, go back to mitochondria, you see. Then, apart from this, you should dramatically, absolutely avoid any blue light 1 or 2 hours before you go to bed. That's one very basic suggestion. You should not exercise just before sleeping, for example. On the contrary, reading a book, soft light, possibly not a LED light, LED light, but let's say classical bulb light or red infrared. Undergoing a photobiomodulation session, let's say 10-15 minutes with the red infrared light, immediately relaxes your body because the vagal component of the autonomic neural system starts to improve, to increase. That means you are preparing your body to go to bed. Sun exposure during daytime sun exposure favors the classical biorhythm in daytime, in nighttime. Because in daytime you need cortisol, not too much, that's the core issue, but in nighttime you need melatonin. And this rhythm is rooted in sun exposure. If you don't expose your body to sun, then you will never sleep properly, for example. In Scandinavia, for example, they use a lot of sun-like lamps, a lot, because they have no sun for 6 months a year. So they use a lot of sun-like lamps. They are basic for human health. And they use also, of course, sauna, which is another fantastic way to get infrared exposure, for example. But that's a little bit long to tell.
Fantastic. Do you take melatonin, Attilio?
Yeah. 10 milligram per
10,
night.
10 minutes
10,
every
15
night.
milligram per night. Yeah, every night. Drops under the tongue.
Excellent. And do you mind me asking, Attilio, do you take any supplements?
Yeah.
What would be your what would be your 5 recommendations for a supplement to take?
Well, let's say it's not so easy to tell you. Well, on one side, I take care of mitochondria, as I told you, to be energetic, because mitochondria, I tell you a very little story. Can you imagine that all the human cells which die very early, let's say erythrocytes, red blood cell, they die after 6 months, okay? Their life is 6 months. And the skin cells also have a very short life. So all these cells have no mitochondria, the red blood cells, or very few mitochondria. On the contrary, oocytes are the cells which have the highest number of mitochondria, around 200,000 mitochondria per cell. So oocytes, why? Because oocytes are fundamental for life from ovarian glands, okay? So we need oocytes from females, otherwise there will be no life on Earth. So they have, let's say, 400, 500, 600 oocytes per life, okay? But these are the most important cells in a female, and let's say in human race. They have 200,000 mitochondria because mitochondria gives life. And the other very important cells, neurons, your myocytes, liver cells, they have 2,000, 5,000 mitochondria. The more the cell is important, the higher the number of the mitochondria. So mitochondria is important. So I take supplements for mitochondria. For example, glutathione, not by oral ingestion because it doesn't work so well. I prefer intravenous. I get some intravenous treatment, let's say weekly. But apart from this, you can get PQQ, which is a new molecule, pyrroquinolinaquinone, a very strange name, PQQ. It's very interesting for mitochondria. Then vitamin C can be useful. Carnosine is an interesting supplement compound for especially skin and anti-glycation, because our metabolic problem is insulin excess, insulin resistance, and so on and so on. And to combat, then you need something like that. You may need, for example, other polyphenols. Polyphenols are extremely useful in human health, such as maqui, hydroxytyrosol, aerosol, and others. These are, let's say, generally speaking, very useful.
Excellent. And you say mitochondria. Am I right in thinking that fasting is a way of autophagy to remove old and senescent mitochondria and produce new ones? Is that a good strategy for looking after your mitochondrial health?
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. Fasting is one of the most natural ways to improve your health and longevity, because when you fast, let's say, at least 14 hours, let's say ideally 16 hours per day, or once, twice, 3 times a week, then you oblige your body to make autophagy. That means cleaning your cell. And you improve mitophagy, which is the root process for apoptosis. I mean, old cells must die and new cells must come. If they don't die, of course, you can get cancer, you can get a lot of inflammatory processes in your tissues, and so on and so on. And the root process is mitophagy, and mitophagy is improved during fasting. Not only this, because insulin sensitivity is dramatically improved, because if you don't eat, you have no insulin, you have no, let's say, well, you have little insulin because you get carbohydrates and you get glucose from your fat or from your glycogen and so on. But anyway, it's much lower insulin level in your blood. And when you eat, let's say during your breakfast, if you skip your dinner, which would be the best habit, then at breakfast you get little insulin to immediately get your glucose into the cells. So this is another very important thing. And to make it short, you also increase your growth hormone, GH. The GH is very important to be, let's say, young and strong. And everybody thinks about injections or supplements, which are not so easy to handle, let's say, from the safety point of view. On the contrary, when you perform intermittent fasting, you increase your GH. It has been shown, you know. So there are many benefits from intermittent fasting. And this is also useful, for example, against cancer, because that helps to clean, let's say, your cells more. But there are many studies on fasting.
How long do we have to fast for, Attilio? 3 days, 2 days?
Well, from the ideal point of view, I would say every single day. I'm doing it every single day. But okay, that's a strategy which is possible, but not compulsory and so on. Once, twice a week would be just something for 16 hours.
By that you mean for 16 hours. Eat nothing for 16 hours.
Yeah, drink all the water you can and all the water you want. You can drink coffee in case at proper hours, of course, without any sugar. You can use a stevia, for example, to sweeten the coffee if you need. But let's say apart from coffee, just specific, or you can add even better. You can no advertisement. Okay, it is an English product I use. You can add the MCT, middle chain triglyceride, which are wonderful, like coconut, middle chain triglyceride, or like ghee butter is a wonderful additional compound to your food or even to your coffee if you want. Anyway, water and a little coffee, nothing else in those 16 hours. That's why you have to sleep. So, or you skip your breakfast or you skip your dinner, and you get 16 hours in a way or in another without any food, and that really helps you. And you feel better brain because your mitochondria love ketones, body. Ketone. I don't know, in English is ketones?
Ketones, yeah, ketones.
Ketones, can you imagine one mitochondria, when mitochondria gets glucose, okay, you get or 2 molecules of ATP in the anaerobic glycolysis, or you get 32, 36 ATP molecules from the oxidative phosphorylation inside the mitochondria. When you get ketones, you get 160 molecules of ATP in the mitochondria. So what do our mitochondria want? Sugar or fat? Sugar or ketones? Ketones. When we have ketones, we are wonderful human beings. And ketones come from middle chain triglyceride, coconut oil, ghee butter, and from fasting, also from exercising and so on. And our brain is made of neurons, and neurons are made of mitochondria, and mitochondria want ketones. So when you have to treat any neurodegenerative diseases, you have to give ketones to your patients. But that's
Very
a little bit
interesting.
confusing, maybe.
No. I tell you, I'm on board with all that you've said. I've tried intermittent fasting. I try to do it as much as I can. I've tried ketones. I've tried medium chain glycerides. I've fasted for 2 or 3 days, and the health benefits are very significant, I must say. Well, Attilio, it's I'm so surprised. The thing I'm going to take away from this mostly is to try and be more mindful of my thoughts and try not to react to stress and spike that cortisol response and that noradrenaline response to the fight and flight of stress. Because from what you say, that's the most important thing that we should all be doing, thinking what we think we become. And the link between mind and body is so close and so entangled. It's very important that we do that. The other things that you've mentioned, some of those supplements I'm not aware of. I need to do some more research about melatonin. Tell me, one last thing. A glass of red wine, is that a good thing?
Yes, a glass of red wine is perfect. A glass, not a bottle.
A glass, not a bottle. So one glass of wine on occasion is not a bad thing.
No. It's good because of polyphenols, because of happiness. Happiness.
Yes,
So that means
happiness.
proper emotions. Because if you drink red wine with pleasure, the secret is pleasure at the end of the day. If you get pleasure in what you do, then you think properly. Pleasure helps you to live longer. I know it's a silly and very, let's say, naive thing to say, but that's true.
I think you're right, actually. So many times now we see on podcasts and videos and YouTube people telling us how to live longer and live a healthy life. But it's such a miserable process, so much denial and so much hard exercise and so forth. And I think your comment about pleasure being at the center of a healthy life is a good point that we should pay more attention to.
For example, we talked about intermittent fasting. When I talk to my patient about a proper diet, then I tell them, I know you will become sad. You will become bored with all this stuff. Don't eat this. Don't eat that. You love pasta. You love that. Italians do not eat to live to eat. Having said this, how can you oblige them to have a proper diet lifelong? I tell them, okay, no more diet. Just don't eat at all for 16 hours. And they say, that's more interesting. So I can eat whatever I want. No, you cannot eat whatever you want. You should eat better, but especially you should not eat for 16 hours per day, once, twice, 3 times a week. You get slimmer, you get healthier without getting bored, sad, tired. And then you stop your diet and you make a kind of yo-yo with your weight. Diet down, then up and down. This is something I see several times. With intermittent fasting, you significantly improve the habit and the attitude of the patient. If they understand, if they want, and we are again on the side of the wish and the will of the patient. But when you get pleasure doing that, then you do it.
Fantastic. Attilio, you've been very generous with your time. You've put together a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. It's been a
Can you
pleasure to talk to
imagine?
you.
Can you imagine, Haroun, that at the International International Union of Phlebology Congress, which is in Buenos Aires in October, on the 7th of October, I will give a course on longevity medicine in Buenos Aires for participants of the Phlebology and Lymphology World Congress, those who want to come. I don't know if it will be probably in Spanish, but anyway, there may be simultaneous translation. I don't know. Anyway, there will be my course on longevity medicine because the organizers accepted my proposal.
I think courses on longevity medicine should be part of nearly every conference, Attilio. I think all doctors should have some interest in longevity medicine. And People, members of the public now, are waking up to the idea that unfortunately our public health services are not health services, they are sickness services. And we often go to see our doctor when we are sick. And in many cases, it's a little bit too late. We need to be thinking about our health. If we have good health, it's a precious gift that's been given to us. And we have a duty, each and every one of us, to look after it. But the problem is many of us don't know the harm we're doing with so-called health advice. And I think that's where longevity medicine, the advice that you've given today, is so important, because there's so much misinformation, so much confusion amongst the general public and many doctors. So I think it's hugely important. I think any opportunity to talk about longevity medicine is to be grasped, Attilio. And I think that's a great thing that you're doing there. I'm sure it will be well received, I'm sure.
Thanks a lot for your appreciation.
You're welcome. If you enjoyed that video, please consider subscribing and giving it a thumbs up. It helps to get the word out, and perhaps you'll be the first to see my next video. Thank you for watching.